Hello, I'm going to try to go through some reproducible steps for you to take to try to figure out what's going on with my rules, or figure out what's going on with the reapproval or the need for reapproval. First off, what I've done is I have deactivated my rule set because I know it is complex. And I have activated a rule set that's very, very simple, and essentially that rule is just let's see here, it's basically a rule that states if somebody takes a discount greater than 35% to include the RSD. I have a rule that automatically resets all approvers to exclude that runs before this rule set, so I did not put anything in the else side of that statement. So essentially I've created just a generic one product in the basket, very, very simple. Currently I have no discount. I'm going to put a 36% discount on this item, which should generate the need for an approval, and yes, it does. So now I'm going to submit for approval, and then I'm going to actually hit the pause because it takes about 45 seconds for that to go. So I'm just going to hit pause here. So, okay, so now that I have gotten that quote, all I'm going to do now is just go through and approve it. I'll save that and I'll hit pause to keep you from having to wait. Okay, now the quote is approved. By the way, I feel compelled to mention that I was getting work basically like a working, and finally, after about waiting a minute, I finally hit the refresh page and then it gives me the approved. So I don't know what's going on there. I don't know why that's happening. I don't know if that affects anything, but I just thought I would bring that to light in case that's something that matters. So now I'm going to go back here. I'm going to pretend to be the original user. I'm going to find that approved quote, and I'm going to modify that discount to show that it's not re-triggering the rule. So I'm going to increase this so that it's actually a worse scenario. And when I go to the top here, come on, you can see that the status is still approved, although I believe it should have triggered a need for reapproval. And if you look here at my rule set, again, you can see that I have excluded before including. Okay, so here we go here. It is meeting the rule, and it is saying that is including the approval group. However, you can see here that I'm not being asked to send it back for approval. So that's kind of the issue I believe we have in a nutshell. And then I want to take a minute just to explain kind of how my more complex rule set works, so that because I have a proposed solution for if we can get this to work. I think that my new rule that I've modified will work, again, if we can get through the fact that this little rule here doesn't work. Essentially, my rule set is made up of several parts, but the gist of it is if any product, we got several different things. If a person puts a product in the basket, if it's a standard product, it needs to go to a regional sales director to get commission put on it, because we can manipulate commission with each configuration. If it's a custom product or a write-in product, then they need to go to engineering, and it needs to go to several other approvers. So essentially what I've done, originally I had just basically written the rules just like that to include and exclude as needed, and that was a nightmare because inadvertently there would always be some situation that could come up that the rule, depending on the order the products were put in the basket, a later product would negate the include of a prior product. So essentially I decided to, if a product needs an approver, I set a flag. I have 4 different approvers, and I set flags accordingly. So if product number 1 needs this person to approve it, I set that person's flag to 1. If product number 2 needs the second person to approve it, I set that person's flag to a value of number 1. At the end of the day, every product could need all 4 people or not, or they might need 1, whatever the mix is. The flags are set to either 1 or 0 depending. And then I have a second rule set, which basically sets a hierarchy to where if any product needs the engineer's approval, that is what happens first. And I can show you essentially this hierarchy rule is right here, 132.16, 2016 approval hierarchy. And that's just a series of, if this person needs to approve it, then that's the person and we ignore all others. And then when that person does their part, then it increments to the next person. And then that person does their part, it increments to the third person. So that kind of cascades down nicely, and it works really well. And then I was having a problem of, essentially I could trigger the new approver, but I couldn't get it to give me back the submit for approval button. So what I determined was that in order to get that submit for approval, essentially the entire rule set needs to fire once where no one is needed. So I have to have that section that says approver required, and it's the person number 1, and then that person would put their information in, and then I needed to fire the rules to basically exclude everybody so that the approval required section of the quote would go away. And then with another firing of the rules, it would then bring the next person back, and then it would bring the submit for approval button back. So I've got a second flag, and that's this count. Essentially, the rule, it runs twice, and I've done some things to force the person to have to put a second input in, so that they're always, like when they put their input in, they're firing the rules essentially 2 times in a row to basically turn the approval off, bring the approval back. So that's what this count is, and that works fairly well. There's times when it shows that they don't need to approve and they really just need to refresh the rules again, and it'll show that the next approver needs to approve, and I'm instructing my users for that. But this is what I see as inherently wrong with my rule set the way it has been written. Essentially, I had written it in the past to say, if the person's flag is 1, then send it to them for approval. The problem with that, if I'm understanding how this works, the problem with that is that the actual rule that sends it for approval is always going to be the same. So if someone would come back later and add something new to the basket, it's still going to say, if that's equal to 1, then send it to that approver, and they're going to come back and say, yep, it equaled 1 last time and it was approved, and therefore we do not need to resubmit for approval. So at least that's how I think it works. So I have introduced yet a third level of flags. These are like, it's basically a flag that every time the rule set is run, it increments down by 1. So it starts off as 0, and then every time the rule set is run, or the basket is updated, it subtracts 1. So I had to do that with 2 flags, basically flag 1, flag 2. And I say, flag 2 equals flag 1 minus 1, and then flag 1 equals flag 2. And that makes flag 1 is the real one I'm worried about. And I have changed all of my rules to say, instead of if the flag is 1, now we go down here and I have this, if this approval flag, which is the one that's consistently going down, is less than 1. So in other words, this statement's always going to be true because it starts off at 0. So now we're just saying, basically, if I would send it to this approver, because this is the include the RSD, so this count is always going to be the same, but now when the person approves the quote, it is going to say this approval flag is going to be at some value, negative value. Maybe it's at -8. They approve it, and now when a person goes in and makes a modification, it's going to go to -9, and this rule is going to say, wait a minute, I let this person, or we approved it when the approval flag was at -8. Now that it's at -9, the conditions have changed, and it should fire the need for reapproval. So that's my thought process. I guess I'd like to know if you agree that that would work. If so, I think that this could be the final, hopefully, knock on wood, final iteration of the rule set. But I think the first thing is that that simple rule set needs to work, and for some reason it's not. So if you could let me know what you find out, I'd appreciate it. Thank you for your time.